Part 1: Shadows of Normalcy. The moving van crept along the pristine streets of Glenwood Lane like a specter seeking refuge in daylight. The sun perched high, casting short shadows that somehow seemed too deep, too dark for such a sunny day. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the car window, watching our new neighborhood unfold with a mix of excitement and unease. Something about this place felt off, a dissonance between its picture-perfect appearance and a chill that ran down my spine every time my gaze met the empty streets. "We're here, Alex. Home sweet home," my dad announced, a cheerful note in his voice that failed to mask the strain of yet another move. This time felt different. I could sense it in the pit of my stomach, a foreboding that settled like lead. As we unloaded boxes, he appeared, Mr. Thompson, our next-door neighbor. Dressed impeccably in a crisp, white button-down and khaki slacks, he was the embodiment of suburban refinement. Yet, it was his too-wide smile and the piercing gaze behind his spectacles that caught my attention, sending a chill down my spine. "Welcome to Glenwood Lane," he said, his voice smooth but with an underlying coldness that made me want to step back. "You'll love it here, Alex. Plenty of kids your age." His use of my name, not offered but known, was the first note in a symphony of strangeness that would define my time in Glenwood Lane. The days that followed were a blur of unpacking and polite introductions to neighbors who all shared that same, unsettlingly wide smile and overkeen interest in our family. It was during one of these endless days that I found myself at the local park, a desperate attempt to escape the confines of our still unfamiliar house. A group of kids about my age were playing a game that seemed normal at a glance. Yet, as I approached, the air around us grew tense, their laughter not reaching their eyes. I tried to join in, misstepping only once, but it was enough to send me sprawling to the ground, my hands scraping painfully against the concrete. Laughter erupted, not with the warmth of shared amusement, but sharp and mocking. It was an accident, they said, but as I nursed my stinging palms, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was anything but. This sentiment was echoed in the glances exchanged among the children, a shared secret I was not privy to. This wasn't just about fitting in, it was about survival in a neighborhood that was anything but normal. That night, as I lay in my new room, the shadows seemed to whisper secrets in a language I couldn't understand. The unsettling feeling that had taken root in me upon our arrival began to grow, fed by the day's events and the certainty that Glenwood Lane hid something sinister just beneath its perfect surface. Part 2: Unveiling the Shadows. In the weeks that followed, my initial attempts to mingle with the Glenwood Lane kids only deepened my sense of isolation. But fate, it seemed, had a peculiar way of unfolding. During one of my aimless wanderings through the neighborhood, I stumbled upon Sarah and Luke, siblings who lived a few houses down the road from mine. Unlike the others, their smiles didn't reach their eyes, which held stories of understanding and shared secrets. We met in a secluded spot near the edge of the woods, a safe haven from prying eyes. They were cautious at first, their answers measured, but our shared sense of alienation created an instant, if wary, bond. Sarah, with her probing gaze and keen intellect, and Luke, quieter but equally observant, seemed to be the only ones who questioned the undercurrents of Glenwood Lane the way I did. "It's best not to ask too many questions," Sarah whispered one day, her eyes scanning our surroundings as if expecting the trees themselves to listen in. "And never alone," added Luke, his voice barely above a murmur. Their warnings only served to fuel my curiosity and my resolve. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, turning every shadow into a potential observer, every whisper into a veiled threat. One night, my paranoia reached its peak. I lay in my bed, the comforting familiarities of my room distorted into a cage of fear. The darkness seemed to press against my window, filled with unseen watchers. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, felt like the precursor to something sinister. My imagination, once a source of solace, now twisted into a relentless tormentor, painting horrors in the shadows. I knew they were just figments of my overactive mind, but the fear was real, palpable, a thick blanket smothering my thoughts. That night, I understood what it meant to be truly afraid of the dark, not for the imaginary monsters it might hide, but for the very real feeling of being hunted, observed by unseen eyes that knew too much and shared too little. Glenwood Lane, with its neat lawns and smiling neighbors, hid secrets too dark for the light of day, and I was caught in its web, a fly struggling against the silk threads of a meticulously woven trap. Part 3, the final reckoning. As the days shortened and the shadows grew longer, my resolve hardened. Encouraged by my newfound allies, Sarah and Luke, I decided it was time to seek answers. The opportunity presented itself in the form of another gathering, the secretive meetings that had intrigued and terrified me in equal measure. Under the unnerving glow of the street lamps, I found Mr. Thompson surrounded by the neighborhood kids, their faces illuminated by a flickering, almost spectral light. My heart hammered against my rib cage as I approached, my determination clouding the fear. "Mr. Thompson," I began, my voice steadier than I felt, "what are these gatherings about? Why does everyone act so strangely?" The air grew thick with silence as all eyes turned to me. Mr. Thompson's smile never wavered, but there was a glint in his eye that I hadn't seen before. "Alex, my boy," he replied, his voice silk over steel. "Some things are best left unexplored. Curiosity, after all, has consequences." His words, cryptic and cold, sent shivers down my spine. I pushed for more, but each question was deflected with a skill that left me feeling small, exposed, and more lost than ever. My confrontation at the gathering changed everything and nothing at the same time. The accidents and whispers continued, but now there was a weight to them, a sense of an impending culmination that I couldn't escape. I had crossed a threshold, and there was no returning to ignorance. Then came the abrupt decision to move, a sudden announcement from my parents that we were leaving Glenwood Lane. No explanations were given, and none were sought. It was an escape, a desperate flight from the unknown. On moving day, amidst the chaos of boxes and farewells, Sarah and Luke found me. Their somber expressions mirrored my own, a silent acknowledgement of the shared ordeal we'd been through. "We wish we could tell you everything," Sarah said, her voice heavy with regret. Luke nodded, his eyes speaking volumes of unspoken truths. "Just remember, not all questions have answers you want to find." Their cryptic farewell haunted me as we drove away from Glenwood Lane, the neighborhood receding into the distance like a bad dream. But some dreams cling to you, tendrils of mist that refuse to be banished by the light. Years later, as I recount this tale, the shadows of Glenwood Lane linger. The experience taught me that reality is often stranger and more terrifying than fiction. The questions raised during those unsettling months remain unanswered, a puzzle lacking key pieces. As I share my story, I invite you, the listener, to look back on your own past, to scrutinize those odd moments and peculiar individuals. Glenwood Lane might have been my nightmare, but it opens the door to a universal truth. Beneath the veneer of normalcy, darkness thrives, nurtured by the unobserved and unspoken. The nature of reality, the essence of humanity's darkest corners, remains a shrouded mystery, a story without an end, leaving us to wonder what lurks in the shadows of our seemingly ordinary lives. The novelty of moving often wears thin quickly, especially when you're 10 years old. However, Edgewood Avenue wasn't just any neighborhood. It was as if it had leapt out of a storybook, with its tree-lined streets, cheerful pastel houses, and the kind of community where everyone knew your name, or so they promised. That's how it seemed when my family's car rolled past the welcome sign, my nose pressed against the window, taking it all in with a mixture of awe and longing. Action Beat 1, First Impressions and Evening. Our new home, number 24, sat snug between two similar quaint cottages, but with a wild garden that hinted at adventure. The first evening was a flurry of unpacking, greetings from curious neighbors, and my parents' relief at finally settling down. Yet as twilight merged into night and I lay in my new room surrounded by unopened boxes, the comforting sounds of the neighborhood gave way to softer, almost secretive murmurs floating through my slightly ajar window. They were soft, whispering voices that seemed both out of place and entirely at home in the twilight. Despite my tiredness, curiosity nudged me towards the window, but all that greeted me was the night's calm. I told myself it was just the wind, yet sleep came uneasily, with echoes of those whispers threading through my dreams. Action Beat 2, Bizarre Welcome. The sun's warmth and birdsong made the previous night's unease feel almost foolish. Eager to explore and make friends, I ventured out, finding the neighborhood bathed in morning light and laughter. A group of kids around my age was playing near the park, and I approached, heart pounding with both excitement and nerves. Their game stopped abruptly as they turned to me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and something else I couldn't quite place. I introduced myself, met with nods and cautious smiles, but as I joined their game, I couldn't shake off the odd feeling that their welcoming words were tinged with an unspoken warning. It was in the way they glanced at each other, their hushed tones when they thought I wasn't listening, a sense of being both included and kept at arm's length. Action Beat 3, Encounter with Mr. Jenkins. Days blended into each other as I settled into my new routine. It was on one of these ordinary afternoons that I decided to explore the woods edging the neighborhood. The woods had always intrigued me, with their dense canopy and tales of adventure whispered among the kids. As I neared the pathway leading into the heart of the greenery, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Startled, I turned to find Mr. Jenkins, an elderly neighbor known for his eccentricities, his gaze intense and warning. "Best steer clear of these woods, lad," he said, voice grave, an uncharacteristic seriousness in his wrinkled eyes. "Some things are better left undisturbed." He released me, his usual jolly demeanor slipping back as quickly as it had vanished, leaving me standing there, 1,000 questions racing through my mind. What was it about the woods that warranted such a warning? And why did I feel a cold shiver dance down my spine, despite the warmth of the day? Unsettled yet more curious than ever, I found myself drawn into a mystery that felt as old as Edgewood Avenue itself, unaware of the shadows that began to creep into the edges of my new life. Action Beat 4, Gifts from Nowhere. The tranquility of Edgewood Avenue was shattered one morning by a discovery so peculiar it sent ripples of whispered speculation through the neighborhood. Our doorstep, along with many others, was graced with an unexpected gift. My own missing basketball, previously lost and long given up on, sat proudly at our threshold, muddy and worn as if it had been on an adventure of its own. This wasn't an isolated incident. Around the neighborhood, beloved toys and personal items thought lost were returned, placed in plain sight, yet no one saw how they got there. Conversations were laced with a mixture of gratitude and unease. Whom or what were we thanking for these returned memories? Action Beat 5. Emma's warning. It was Emma, the girl who lived 3 houses down and had become my closest companion, who first voiced the fear we all felt. We were sitting on the edge of the park, the returned items a topic that buzzed like a bee among us kids. "Don't you find it weird?" she whispered, her usual bravado replaced by a chilling seriousness. "It's like someone or something is watching, taking notes, playing with us." Her eyes darted around, as if half expecting to catch a glimpse of this unseen observer. That conversation planted a seed of dread that no amount of rationalization could uproot. Someone was watching, manipulating events with a precision that left us unnerved yet captivated. Action Beat 6, Strange Gathering. My curiosity, now edged with a sharp thread of fear, pushed me to seek answers. One evening, under a cloak of twilight, I followed a hunch that led me to the outskirts of the wooded area where the whispers first found my ears. Hidden by the shadows, I watched a congregation of neighborhood adults standing in a loose circle near Mr. Jenkins's house. Their voices were low, urgent, fractured by disagreement or concern. It was hard to tell. Mr. Jenkins was there, his hands animatedly moving as if sketching a warning in the air. The meeting dispersed as suddenly as it had gathered, leaving only lingering glances and an atmosphere thick with unspoken tension. As I retreated to the safety of my room, the images of the night replayed in my mind. What were they discussing? What could instill such a depth of concern in a community as close-knit as ours? My thoughts swirled with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last, drawing me deeper into the enigma that enveloped Edgewood Avenue. Action Beat 7, The Warning in the Woods. Compelled by an irrepressible need to understand, I ventured alone into the woods, following the path less taken, where secrets whispered with every leaf's rustle. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon a startling scene, a clearing, eerily silent, at the center of which lay a pile of photographs. Some were so old their edges had curled with age, others fresh, capturing moments of laughter and life in Edgewood. Among these snapshots of joy, my blood froze at the sight of a photo of Emma and me, taken from a distance without our knowledge. A warning? A threat? The message was as clear as it was chilling. We were all being watched, documented in a way that felt profoundly invasive. Action Beat 8, Mr. Jenkins's revelation. Fueled by a mix of fear and determination, I confronted Mr. Jenkins the next day. The air between us was charged with an urgency as I demanded answers. The old man's eyes, usually so lively, dimmed with a sorrow born of deep, unspeakable knowledge. Edgewood has eyes, lad. It sees all, knows all. We do what we can to appease it, to keep it from our doors. But his voice trailed off, lost to a sigh of resignation. The revelation that our seemingly idyllic neighborhood harbored a malevolent awareness that demanded strange tributes in exchange for peace left me reeling. What manner of place had we come to call home? Action Beat 9, the breaking point. The strain of secrets and the weight of unseen eyes became too much to bear. Whispered conversations turned to arguments at home, my nights haunted by nightmares that blurred the line between sleep and waking terror. It was when a beloved pet, one of the many that had vanished only to return, came back altered, wrong in ways that words failed to capture, that my parents decided it was time to leave. Our departure was hasty, a blur of packing and whispered goodbyes, as if by leaving quickly we could outrun the shadows that clung to our heels. Ending. The unresolved mystery. As our car took us away from Edgewood Avenue, the neighborhood that had promised a new beginning, I looked back through tear-blurred eyes. The quaint houses and manicured lawns faded into the distance, but the memories, the fears, and the unsolved mysteries clung to me, a haunting remnant of what I'd lived through. The truth of what watched over Edgewood, what demanded tribute and orchestrated our fears, remained shrouded in darkness, an enigma that whispered doubts about the very nature of reality. In my heart, a seed of terror took root, a constant reminder that some places, some secrets are best left undiscovered. And yet the questions linger, unanswered, as does the disturbing awareness of our vulnerability in the face of unseen forces that seek to manipulate and control. As we drove toward a new life, I could only wonder if anywhere could truly be safe from the unknown horrors that lurk within the ordinary, masked by the facade of normalcy, ever watching, ever waiting. The day we moved to Juniper Street was like waking up from a dream, only to find yourself stepping into another, far stranger one. Our house, number 224, sat snug between two neatly trimmed hedges, with a front yard that looked like it hadn't dared grow a weed in decades. It was picturesque, the kind of setting you'd expect to see on the cover of a lifestyle magazine. My parents were overjoyed, reveling in what they called our fresh start. But as I stood there, a box of my belongings in my arms, I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. It was as if the air itself was too still, too silent. The first few days in the neighborhood consisted of a blur of unpacking and polite neighborly visits. Everyone seemed nice, though in a way that felt rehearsed. It wasn't until I met Jamie that I thought I might have found a glimmer of something genuine in Juniper Street. Jamie lived 3 houses down from us and had the wild energy of someone who seemed to be in constant motion. He was kicking a soccer ball against his garage when he first caught sight of me. The ball rolled to a stop at my feet, and as I kicked it back, he approached with an easy smile. "New kid, huh?" he said, his tone friendly but with an edge of curiosity. "Yeah, just moved in," I replied, trying to match his casual demeanor. "You should come to the park after school tomorrow. A bunch of us hang out there. Might as well get to know everyone." The invitation surprised me. I hadn't expected to make a friend so quickly, let alone receive an invite to some neighborhood gathering. I nodded, and with that, Jamie darted off, leaving me standing there with a sense of cautious optimism about Juniper Street. The next day, after a confusing blur of introductions and trying not to get lost in my new school, I found my way to the park. True to his word, Jamie was there, along with a handful of other kids. "Alex, right? Come on over. We were about to start a game," Jamie called out as I approached. The game, as it turned out, was unlike anything I'd ever played. It wasn't tag, nor hide and seek, nor any recognizable sport. Instead, Jamie explained the rules with a fervor that seemed a bit too intense for something he claimed they made up on the fly. The objective seemed to shift, the boundaries were nebulous, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more beneath the surface. A few days after my initiation into their afternoon pastimes at the park, Jamie invited me over to his house. It was an invitation to step further into the heart of Juniper Street, and I accepted, my curiosity tinged with that same unease that had gripped me since we'd moved in. Jamie's room was a scattered collection of action figures, books, and the usual detritus of a kid's space. However, what caught my eye was a shelf crowded with jars, boxes, and notebooks. Each jar contained objects that, at first glance, seemed ordinary. A piece of glass, a twisted fork, a doll's eye. Yet, arranged as they were, they took on an unsettling quality. "What's all this?" I asked, unable to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Jamie glanced at the shelf, then back at me, his expression unreadable for a moment. "Materials for the game," he said simply, as if that explained everything. I wanted to ask more, to understand why collecting these seemingly random items was meaningful, how it tied into the game, and what the real purpose behind all of it was. But before I could, Jamie's mom called us down for snacks, and the moment was lost. Those early days on Juniper Street had felt like teetering on the edge of a mystery I couldn't quite grasp. The more I saw, the less I understood, and my initial unease began to solidify into a tangible apprehension. What I didn't realize then was that this was just the beginning, and the depths of Juniper Street's mysteries were far beyond what I could have imagined. The incident occurred just a week after I had started to feel somewhat acclimated to the oddities of Juniper Street. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the pavement as I made my way home from a late afternoon of the game at the park. That's when I heard it, a heated argument emanating from the alleyway between two houses. Curiosity overtook caution, and I found myself inching closer, hidden by the dimming light. Two adults from the neighborhood stood face to face, their expressions twisted in anger. But it wasn't the sight of the argument that stopped me in my tracks, it was the language they were speaking. It sounded complex, with harsh vowels and clicking consonants, completely foreign yet oddly familiar in a way that sent shivers down my spine. I must have made a noise because suddenly one of them turned, their eyes scanning the darkness. I retreated hastily, heart pounding, leaving the unintelligible argument behind. When I lay in bed that night, the alien sounds echoed in my mind. What was it about Juniper Street that made the ordinary feel so deeply unsettling? The next day, I sought answers from Jamie. His demeanor had changed, the easygoing nature replaced with a guarded tension. As I recounted what I had heard, hoping for some rational explanation, I watched his expression closely. There was a flicker of something, recognition perhaps, before he masked it with a shrug. "People argue all the time," he said dismissively. "Maybe you just heard a TV show or something." But I knew what I heard was real, and Jamie's evasion only deepened my resolve to uncover the truth. However, the opportunity to probe further never came. 2 days later, Jamie was gone. His house, once lively and open, sat silent. His family's departure was as sudden as it was mysterious, leaving no forwarding address and taking with them the closest thing I had to a friend on Juniper Street. The absence of Jamie left a void not only in the neighborhood dynamic, but in my quest for answers. My inquiries about his whereabouts and the reasons behind their abrupt move were met with vague responses or outright avoidance. It was as if, overnight, Jamie and his family had been erased from the community's collective memory. The shock and bewilderment of Jamie's disappearance became a turning point in my experience on Juniper Street. The games, the collections, the arguments in unknown languages, all of it seemed to converge into a singular, unsettling question. What was really happening in this neighborhood? Despite my initial enthusiasm for unraveling the mysteries of Juniper Street, I found myself standing alone against an impenetrable wall of secrecy. And with Jamie gone, my sense of isolation deepened, leaving me to navigate the unsettling undercurrents of the neighborhood with growing trepidation and a profound sense of loss. In the wake of Jamie's sudden disappearance and the silence that followed, I found myself drawn to the one person who seemed to hold the keys to the many mysteries of Juniper Street, Mrs. Calloway. She lived in the oldest house on the block, a Victorian relic that seemed to whisper secrets through its cracked windows and peeling paint. I approached her under the guise of curiosity about the history of the neighborhood, but my questions were met with cryptic answers that danced around the truth. Mrs. Calloway's eyes, sharp and knowing, seemed to pierce through me as if she understood the true nature of my visit. Juniper Street has always been a place of unusual happenings, she said, her voice a blend of nostalgia and caution. The game, as you call it, is merely a reflection of the deeper connections between the residents. But what does it mean? Why does everything seem so off here? I pressed, desperate for some semblance of clarity. Mrs. Calloway leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Not all things are meant to be understood by everyone. Sometimes it's the not knowing that keeps us safe. Her words did little to quell the storm of questions in my mind. If anything, they only served to deepen the enigma, leaving me with a quiet sense of dread about what lurked beneath the surface of Juniper Street. As the days turned into weeks and then months, life on Juniper Street returned to its outward semblance of normalcy. New families moved in, filling the void left by Jamie and his family. The game continued, though I found myself participating less and less, becoming more of an observer to the strange rituals that once enticed me. Years passed and the mysteries of Juniper Street faded into the background of my life. Yet they never truly left me. The unanswered questions and unresolved mysteries became a part of who I was, a shadow that followed me into adulthood. Sitting in a cafe years later, I find myself jotting down these memories, trying to make sense of what I experienced. The further I delve into the past, the more I realize how much of it remains shrouded in mystery. Looking back, I wonder if I was ever truly seeking answers, or if the allure of the unknown was what drew me in all along. To those outside looking in, Juniper Street might appear as just another quaint suburban lane. But to me, it remains a symbol of the unexplainable aspects of life, a reminder that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. As I close my notebook and gaze out at the bustling city street, I can't help but feel a sense of eerie contentment. Juniper Street, with its peculiar residents and cryptic games, taught me to embrace the unknown, to accept that some things are beyond our understanding. And so, I share this story, not as a cautionary tale, but as an invitation to question, to wonder, and to consider the hidden depths beneath the ordinary exteriors of our own lives.